1066 is a famous year in English history. There were two invasions, a king of England and a king of Norway died violently in battle, and William of Normandy was crowned as king on Christmas Day. Today we'll be talking about the key events of the year and consider why William came out on top. The year started with the death of Edward the Confessor on 5th January. He was buried in Westminster Abbey the following day, and the funeral was followed closely by the coronation of Harold Godwinson. The Bayeux tapestry shows the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stigand, presiding over the coronation. This was Norman propaganda. Stigand had been excommunicated for pluralism, as he was Bishop of Winchester as well as being Archbishop, and is used to emphasise that Harold was not the legitimate king. In reality, the coronation had been carried out by the highly respected Archbishop of York, Ealdred. Whatever his faults, Harold was no fool, and this was a deliberate decision. Harold also won over the English nobility, crucially by marrying Ealdgyth, the sister of the powerful brothers Edwin of Mercia and Morcar of Northumbria. However, none of this could stop trouble brewing, and the appearance of Halley's comets from 24th April seemed to emphasise this. Comets were seen as a sign of great events to come, whether good or ill. The ghostly fleet on the tapestry shows exactly what the year had in store for Harold: invasion. And invasion came. But the first to challenge Harold was not William, but his own brother Tostig Godwinson, who was still bitter about the way Harold had deserted him in October 1065, when he was ousted as Earl of Northumbria by supporters of Morcar. Tostig raided the Isle of Wight in May, then along the south and east coast before being chased to Scotland. This led Harold to put England on full war footing, and he posted the Fulford, the English levy army, along the south coast. Now he just had to wait for the main attack from Normandy to come, but it didn't. The summer passed quietly, crops grew, and finally Harold was forced to release the Fulford on 8th September. They had already served for more than twice the usual period of time required. Plus, many were farmers, and a rotten harvest feeds no one. 10 days later the invasion came, from Norway. Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, arrived with a force of 300 ships, sailed up the Humber and Ouse, and disembarked at Rickhall near York. Hardrada had been joined by Tostig, who could offer his knowledge of England to Harold in return for regaining his influence and earldom. This caused Harold Godwinson off guard. With autumn fast approaching, the campaigning season was nearing its end. Harold set about preparing an army to meet the challenge of one of the most experienced generals in Christendom. However, the brothers Edwin and Morcar reacted first, joined their forces, and faced Harold Hardrada at the Battle of Fulford on 20th September, with disastrous results. The brothers were inexperienced in battle, but made use of the terrain to protect their flanks, taking up a position with the River Ouse to their right and Marshland to their left, and with Germany Beck between themselves and the Norwegians. The battle quickly became a bloody shoving contest, with Norwegian reinforcements arriving throughout to pile pressure on the English line. Under direction from Harold Hardrada, a charge managed to cut off the English forces closest to the riverbank, and reinforcements began to encircle the English army. Their lines in disarray, the English army broke and fled. Edwin and Morcar themselves escaped. Many of their men were less lucky, being cut down in the pursuit, and some, attempting to cross the river to safety, being drowned by the weight of their own armour. Victorious, Harold Hardrada entered York and accepted its surrender. The English had lost a large number of troops, and the Earls Edwin and Morcar were not in a position to help Harold Godwinson later in the year. Godwinson now responded. He marched his army the 180 miles north from London in just 4 days, and caught the Norwegians by surprise. Harold Hardrada had made camp next to the River Derwent, and was awaiting the arrival of hostages and tribute from York. What he got instead were thousands of angry Englishmen charging to cross the bridge to reach his camp. The Battle of Stamford Bridge on 25th September has sprouted numerous tales, not least from the pen of the Icelandic saga writer Snorri Sturluson. One such has it that a messenger came to the Norwegian lines before the battle, asking to speak to Tostig. He offered Tostig his earldom back if he would rejoin Harold Godwinson. Unimpressed, Tostig asked what would be offered to Harold Hardrada. The messenger replied, 7 feet of ground, or as much more as he is taller than other men. Tostig refused to desert Hardrada, and vowed to either die with honour or conquer England. Once the messenger had gone, Hardrada asked Tostig, "Who was that man that spoke so well?" Tostig replied, That was Harold Godwinson. The Norwegians were unprepared for battle. Part of their force was at Rickhall guarding the ships, and the main force did not have their mail body armour with them. Nevertheless, Hardrada attempted to bar the bridge to buy time and send for reinforcements. The story of a lone Norwegian holding the bridge against all comers is almost certainly fictitious, but reflects the determination with which the Norwegian army fought. He was only overcome once a group of English soldiers got beneath the bridge and skewered him with a spear from below. Without full armour, the Norwegians fought bravely, but were slowly overwhelmed. The arrival of the reinforcements from Rickhall only added to the pile of bodies. A 10-mile run in full armour on what was a brutally hot day is not an ideal warm-up for battle. Tostig Godwinson was killed, Harold Hardrada was killed, and Harold Godwinson had won a famous victory. Harold Godwinson showed mercy to the survivors. He allowed them all, including Hardrada's son Olaf, to return to their ships and sail for Norway. That they only needed 24 of the original 300 ships to do so shows the scale of the devastation. The impact on the English army was also severe. Casualties were as high as a third, and of greatest importance were the losses to the well-trained, well-equipped, and highly disciplined Huscarls, the elite of the English army who could not be replaced quickly. Even those who survived would be tired, with many carrying injuries. But England was safe, and Harold would go down as a hero in English history, for 3 days. William of Normandy crossed the Channel during the night of the 27th to 28th September, landing at Pevensey, and he had spent all year preparing for that moment. From the death of Edward in January, he set about asserting his right to be King of England. He reminded Harold Godwinson of the oath made in 1064-65, accusing him of usurping the throne, and appealed to the Pope Alexander II for support. William's argument that Harold was an oath-breaker and promises that he would reform the English Church brought Alexander on side, and he dispatched a papal banner to William to show this. This greatly aided William's recruitment drive for the invasion, gathering troops not just from Normandy, but also Britain and other parts of France. The promise of a justified war and the riches that would come from victory was a big draw. He also prepared a fleet, designed specially for the invasion. Figures vary a lot, but it is likely that a fleet of 700 ships was created. This included ships which were built specifically to carry horses. Cavalry was a vital part of the Norman war machine, and a key difference between the Norman army and the English one. The English rode, but generally did so for transport rather than fighting on horseback. For the Normans and other parts of Europe, the knight had an important role on the battlefield, offering manoeuvrability and shock impact. 3/4 of a ton of man and mount crashing into a formation at the right time could turn a battle. William had also planned for how to occupy hostile territory. He built a wooden castle in Normandy, had it chopped into sections and then carefully loaded onto the ships. Such a flat-pack castle could be used to quickly create a defensive stronghold in England. All this was nearly for nothing. Unfavourable winds meant that the fleet was forced to sit at Dives throughout the summer. The reasons for moving the fleet along the Norman coastline to St. Valery-sur-Somme in mid-September are disputed. It was either a failed attempt at a crossing, scuppered by the wind, or a deliberate plan. Either way, the result was that the distance of the crossing was shortened, and he was ready to pounce when the wind allowed. The delay caused difficulties. Troops and horses needed to be fed and watered for months, a huge logistical exercise, and clearing the waste away from the camp was no small feat. He also had to keep an increasingly restless army together, but when the time came, the south coast was undefended, as the third guarding it had been sent home on 8th September to gather the harvest, and Harold was in the north following the Battle of Stamford Bridge. William couldn't have planned it better. The crossing was not smooth, though. Travelling under the cover of darkness, his flagship, the Mora, lost sight of the rest of the fleet and had to wait. One story has it that William settled his peers on board by having a relaxing meal until the rest of the fleet caught up. Once at Pevensey, William stumbled as he disembarked and fell onto the beach, an event he made light of by joking that even the ground rushed up to greet him. Having moved to Hastings on the 30th and secured it using his prefabricated castle, William settled down to putting pressure on Harold. He sent detachments of troops into the countryside to pillage the villages and burn houses. The pillaging was practical warfare. It helped to maintain supplies. The burning was psychological warfare. It sent a message to the people of England that Harold could not protect them, and forced the English king to respond. Harold marched his forces rapidly south, reaching London by the 6th of October. He gathered men and set off towards Hastings on the 11th. This is the moment that generates the greatest criticism of Harold's actions in 1066. He rushed to face battle. Surely he should have waited for longer, rested the men who had fought at Stamford Bridge, and waited for fresh troops to arrive. Except, if he did not react, he was failing in a fundamental duty as king, protecting the people, who William was busy devastating. What's more, decisive action and rapid movement had destroyed one invasion only a few weeks before. It is only defeat at Hastings that leads to his swift departure from London being viewed as a mistake, and defeat was far from certain when he set off. Had he won, the same decision would be spoken of as a stroke of genius. And either way it was the decision of a king, doing what a king must, defending his people. Having come close to Hastings on the 13th, Harold made camp and prepared for battle. The two armies which met at Hastings the next morning were composed differently. The English army fought on foot, made up of the 3rd, troops levied from the counties, which was captained by thanes, local nobility, and strengthened by the huscarls. Parts of it were tired from earlier battles, and the proportion of huscarls was lower than it would otherwise have been. Nevertheless, it was still a formidable force. The suggestion that Harold failed to take archers with him is a myth, one disproven by the Bayeux Tapestry. It was just they were fewer in number. The Norman army, in contrast, was more varied. It lined up at Hastings in 3 groups: archers, infantry, and cavalry. This provided more tactical flexibility for William, and the cavalry offered greater manoeuvrability. If Harold had aimed to catch William by surprise, he failed, due to William posting scouts around the countryside to inform him of any threats, and when Harold marched to Hastings, William mustered his army and marched out to meet him. On the 14th of October 1066, the Battle of Hastings began at around 9 in the morning. The two leaders had very different goals. For Harold, simply avoiding defeat would be enough, whilst a clear victory would be ideal. Pinning William on the south coast and stopping his raids would buy time for more troops to arrive before finishing the job later. For William, only a decisive victory would do. Drawn up on a ridge, the English formed a traditional shield wall, a closely packed defensive formation. The hill and the shield wall were perfect protection from the Norman cavalry. William used his archers to soften the English line, sent in his infantry, and then sent the cavalry forward. Whilst the body count rose, none of this could break the English lines. Indeed, it was the Norman cavalry that faltered first, falling back in disarray. Word went around the Norman lines that William had been killed. This was a moment of crisis. With no William, the Normans had no purpose, and the army was in danger of routing. William acted quickly, removing his helmet and riding the line to reorganise his troops. Parts of the English army, seeing the retreating cavalry, believed victory was theirs, and charged down the hill to pursue their defeated foes. Except their enemies were far from defeated, and with discipline restored, they were capable of turning seeming retreat into attack, whirling their horses round and falling on their pursuers. Out of the shield wall, the English forces were pitifully vulnerable and chopped down in large numbers. Harold again has been criticised for this. He either failed to keep order in his ranks, or he failed to organise a full charge and commit the entire army to the chase and overwhelm the Normans before they could fully regroup. However, there was no guarantee a full charge would have succeeded, and keeping order by shouting amidst the noise of battle was no easy feat, especially when your army was short of discipline due to the loss of huscarls earlier in the year. But Harold was still far from beaten, and the battle continued late into the afternoon. The Normans are reported as using the feigned retreat twice more, pretending to run away, then counter-attacking, thinning the English lines further. Finally, William prepared for one last assault, ordering his archers to fire higher into the air to loop over the shield wall before launching a charge. The weakened English lines could not survive this final attack, and Harold was killed, supposedly by an arrow in the eye, more certainly by being cut down by Norman knights. The remainder of the English army began to collapse. Many fled, hoping to escape into the growing dusk. Some Huscarls stayed with the body of their king, only to join him on the ground. William had the decisive victory he needed. Having tended the Norman wounded, William and his army camped on the battlefield. He was not yet king, but he was victorious, and with Harold Godwinson gone, the conquest could begin in earnest. And perhaps he spent some time reflecting on the reasons for his triumph. He could certainly thank Harold Hardrada. The Norwegian invasion had significantly weakened the English army. He may also think Harold Godwinson's mistakes helped, but these supposed mistakes were far from clear-cut. Mostly, he could thank himself. William's careful preparations throughout the year and decisive leadership on the battlefield ensured that he could exploit every opportunity that came his way and finally overcome the English resistance in a fierce 10-hour battle. Thank you for watching this episode of Time to Talk History, and I hope you'll join me again to talk some more history in the future. Goodbye for now, and take care.